A single mother walked 6 miles through pouring rain to reach a job interview. A billionaire CEO sat in his car and watched her the entire way. He didn't stop her. He didn't offer a ride. He didn't send anyone to help. He simply watched. She had no idea he was there. She had no idea the interview was at his company. She had no idea that by the time she reached those doors, soaking wet and shaking, she would force him to confront a truth about himself he had been running from for years. And nothing for either of them would ever be the same. Quentin Ashford had not built his billion-dollar logistics empire by believing what people told him. He built it by watching what they did when they thought no one was looking. Early that morning, he sat in the back of a black luxury sedan parked on a rain-slicked street in downtown Charlotte. The leather seats were heated. The air smelled of sandalwood and fresh espresso from a cup his assistant ordered every morning from a private roaster. His tailored suit cost more than most families spent on rent in months. His watch, a fine timepiece with no family legacy attached, caught the glow of his phone as he scrolled through candidate files. He was alone. He had always been alone. Ashford Logistics moved freight across many states, with warehouses in several cities and a large fleet of trucks under contract with retailers every American recognized. Quentin had started the company years earlier with nothing but a single box truck, a cracked screen phone, and the willingness to drive long hours without stopping. His mother, Evelyn, had worked night shifts at a packaging plant. His father had left before Quentin learned to ride a bicycle. He knew the weight of labor in his shoulders and the ache in his lower back. He remembered the taste of gas station coffee in the early hours, but that was years ago, and he had learned that memory was a liar that softened everything it touched. Years earlier, a man named Julian Croft had nearly destroyed everything Quentin built. Julian had been his COO, his closest advisor, the only person Quentin called by first name. They had built the company's expansion together through long days and weekend calls that felt like brotherhood. Then, the auditors found the accounts, shell companies, redirected payments, falsified invoices stretching back years. Julian had siphoned millions while smiling at Quentin every morning from 3 offices away. The betrayal cost more than money. It cost Quentin the ability to believe loyalty was real. Words are free, he often said in board meetings and interviews. That is why they are worthless. Promises were air, resumes were fiction. References were performances. The only truth was behavior, unscripted, unrehearsed, unobserved behavior. That was why Quentin Ashford, CEO of a major logistics company, personally attended final round interviews for a modest mid-level operations coordinator role. The position sat at the center of daily freight movement, and he believed you could learn everything about a person by watching how they handled pressure. No one was grading. His method was unusual. His board hated it. His HR director, Vivian Ellis, had called it invasive more than once. Before every final interview, Quentin visited the candidate's neighborhood. Not their home, just the area. He watched how they left in the morning. Did they rush or prepare? Were they frantic or focused? Did they check their appearance or simply not care? Did someone drive them or did they find their own way? He never interfered. He never introduced himself early. He never offered help. He simply observed, then decided. Elias, his driver for years, adjusted the rearview mirror as the rain intensified. Thick sheets of water dragged across the windshield, bending streetlights into long orange smears. "Next address, sir?" Elias asked. Quentin looked down at his phone. The file was thin. Sienna Vale, single mother, previous experience in logistics coordination at a small regional firm, employment gap of over a year, no vehicle listed, no emergency contact other than a neighbor. On paper, she was the weakest candidate in the pool. "The address on Breckenridge Court," Quentin said, setting down his coffee. "Apartment 3B. Elias pulled into traffic without another word. The wipers beat their steady rhythm. The heater hummed. The rain kept falling. Somewhere across the city, in a low-income apartment complex with a broken buzzer and a stairwell that smelled of mildew, Sienna Vale was already awake, already dressed, already running out of options. The sky over Charlotte was the color of wet concrete, not the dramatic kind of storm that made the news, but the slow, steady, bone-deep rain that started before dawn and had no intention of stopping. It didn't thunder or flash, it simply fell relentlessly, as if gravity itself had turned personal. Quentin's car rolled through East Charlotte. The neighborhoods changed quickly. Glass towers gave way to strip malls with check-cashing storefronts, then to apartment complexes with chain-link fences and parking lots where half the cars carried expired tags. Elias slowed near the court. It was a 3-story brick building from decades past, never renovated, with metal staircases bolted to the exterior and a playground out front where a broken swing set stood above puddles gathering in cracked asphalt. Quentin leaned forward slightly. The car sat beneath a row of oak trees heavy with rain, far enough to be invisible, close enough to see the front entrance clearly. "Engine off," he said. "We wait." Elias turned the key. The heater died. Within minutes, cold crept in through the window seals, just enough to remind Quentin that warmth was a privilege, not a constant. He ignored it. His eyes stayed fixed on the building's front door. Soon the door opened. A woman stepped out. Young, slim, dark hair pulled back tight. She wore a navy blazer that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, the kind carefully maintained even though it hadn't been carefully purchased. Her dark slacks were practical and clean. No umbrella. In her left hand she carried a plastic grocery bag knotted at the top, wrapped carefully around something flat. Documents she held close to her chest, shielding them from the rain with her own body. In her right hand she carried a pair of black low heels by the straps. On her feet were old running shoes, once white, now gray from miles of wear. She looked up at the sky once, just a brief assessment, no surprise, no frustration, only acknowledgement. Then she turned left onto the sidewalk and started walking. No car, no ride, no one beside her. Just a woman in the rain heading east alone. Quentin watched her cross the parking lot, step over a puddle, and disappear around the corner. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He counted to 10 in his head the way he always did before deciding, then said quietly, "Follow her. Keep distance. Don't let her see us." Elias looked at him in the rearview mirror. Years of driving Quentin Ashford, and he had seen many things, but something in his employer's voice that morning was different, sharper, almost hungry. "Yes, sir," Elias said, starting the engine. The car pulled forward slowly, silently, headlights off despite the rain, staying blocks behind a woman who had no idea she was being watched. Inside the car, warmth returned instantly. Heated leather, climate control, insulated glass that turned the rain into a whisper. Outside, Sienna Vale felt every single drop. Quentin's jaw tightened. She was heading toward downtown. The Ashford Logistics building was miles east. The interview was at 9. She has time, he thought. Enough time if she keeps walking. He settled back into the leather seat and crossed one leg over the other. His coffee was still warm. His suit was still dry. His world was still perfectly controlled. But a question had lodged itself behind his ribs, quiet and stubborn. How far will she go before she quits? Sienna Vale had been awake since before dawn. She hadn't needed an alarm. Fear woke her the way it always did, silent and sharp, sitting on her chest like a stone dropped in the dark. She lay still for a few seconds, counting to 7 the way she had during the worst months, reminding herself the day hadn't started yet, and she still had a moment where nothing had gone wrong. Then she got up. The apartment belonged to Beatrice Monroe, a retired postal worker who lived 2 doors down from Sienna's old place before the eviction. Beatrice had a 2-bedroom with a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and a couch that sagged in the middle but was covered with a clean quilt. She had taken Sienna and Alara in months earlier without being asked. She simply knocked one evening and said, "Get your things. You're staying with me until this gets sorted. No paperwork, no conditions, no lectures." Sienna moved through the dark apartment with the quiet precision of someone used to not waking anyone. She showered quickly in cold water. Beatrice's hot water heater had been unreliable, and Sienna refused to use what little hot water existed before Beatrice woke. She dressed in the bathroom. The navy blazer had come from Goodwill years ago for a small sum. She had dry cleaned it a couple of times since, both times spending money she didn't really have. The black slacks were the only pair without a stain or tear. She had pressed them the night before with a damp towel in a hot pan because Beatrice didn't own an iron. Inside the left pocket of the blazer, folded into a square the size of a matchbox, was a piece of lined notebook paper. Alara had written it in purple crayon months earlier, when the letters were still shaky and uncertain. 5 words. You can do it, Mama. No period, no punctuation, just raw, ungrammatical, absolute belief. Sienna touched it briefly through the fabric. Still there? She exhaled and checked her phone. 2 notifications. A weather alert warned of heavy rain through midday and flash flooding. The transit system announced that the only bus from East Charlotte to downtown had been suspended due to weather. Service would resume at an undetermined time. Sienna stared at the screen for a moment, then opened her banking app. The balance was just a few dollars. Ride apps showed the cheapest trip to headquarters cost more than she had. She closed both. She walked to the kitchen and packed Alara's lunch in a brown paper bag. Turkey sandwich cut diagonally the way Alara liked, an apple, a juice box, and a note on a yellow sticky. Have the best day. I love you more than the whole sky. She left it beside Beatrice's coffee mug, then slipped into Alara's room. Her daughter slept on her side, arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit named Clover, whose ears had gone limp from so many washes. Sienna knelt, brushed a curl from Alara's forehead, and whispered something too quiet to hear. She stood, grabbed the plastic bag with her documents, slipped on her old running shoes, tucked her heels inside, and walked out into the rain. At the bus stop, the bench was empty. The shelter's cracked panel offered no protection, and the sign read, "Service suspended." Sienna stood there a moment, looking east toward downtown miles away, then at her watch. The interview was at 9. She had time, barely, if she walked fast and didn't stop. Her shoes were old but polished. Her blazer was second-hand but pressed. Her plan had collapsed, yet her feet kept moving. She turned east and started walking, not because she had a choice, but because choice had been taken from her so many times that the only thing left was the decision to keep going. And that, she had decided long ago, was the one thing no one could take. Rain hit her face before she reached the end of the block, cold, steady, finding every gap in her clothing, every seam, every patch of skin. It soaked through her blazer within minutes, pressing the fabric flat against her shoulders like a second skin of cold and damp. Her running shoes, already thin at the soles, began absorbing water with every step. Soon, they made a soft, squishing sound against the pavement, a rhythm she couldn't silence no matter how carefully she walked. She held the plastic bag against her chest. Inside, sealed in layers of plastic, were her resume, 2 letters of recommendation, a printed job listing, and a photocopy of her Social Security card. Everything she needed to prove she was worth hiring, protected because she couldn't afford to let rain erase the only evidence of her qualifications. Her body stayed dry nowhere, but the documents stayed dry everywhere. That was the math of her life now. Protect what matters, absorb everything else. She passed a gas station where a man ran from his car to the door with a newspaper over his head, cursing the weather. She passed a dark laundromat with chairs stacked on tables and a crooked closed sign. She passed a church parking lot where deep puddles covered the painted lines. No one else was walking. Sidewalks were empty in every direction. Cars moved through the rain like fish through murky water, headlights blurring drivers invisible behind fogged glass. She was the only person on foot in a city built for people with cars. Over a year earlier, Sienna had owned a car, an old Honda with high mileage and a check engine light that never turned off. She had a job too, as assistant manager at a regional logistics company, handling route scheduling for a fleet of trucks across the region. She was good at it. Her supervisor had said so in writing: organized, reliable, excellent under pressure. Those words still lived in one of the recommendation letters sealed against her chest. Then, the company restructured. The word sounded clean, like an architectural decision, but it meant cutting jobs and closing offices. Sienna's position disappeared. She received a box for her desk items and a couple weeks of severance, short compensation for years of work. That was the exchange rate on her labor. Rylan, Alara's father, had left months before the layoff. He left no note, no forwarding address, just an empty closet and an unpaid utility bill. No child support, no communication, no court order enforceable against someone the system couldn't find. So Sienna became everything: mother, provider, cook, driver, nurse, accountant, bedtime storyteller, early morning alarm. She held every role because no one else showed up. Then, as the dominoes fell, job gone, health insurance gone. Alara developed a severe ear infection that didn't respond to the first antibiotics. Emergency room, specialist, follow-up. Thousands in bills, unpaid, sent to collections, credit destroyed. Rent came due. Sienna paid with her last savings. Next month she couldn't. She begged for an extension. Then the eviction notice arrived. Then she and Alara were out. She sent many job applications over the following months, keeping a spreadsheet on her phone like a prayer list. Company name, date applied, position, status. Most rows said no response. A handful said, interview scheduled. All ended the same. A polite email saying they had chosen another candidate and wishing her well. She never stopped applying. This morning's interview was another chance. At Ashford Logistics, operations coordinator, around $50,000 with benefits. It wasn't a dream job. It was a lifeline dressed in a job title. The rain came harder. Sienna's left shoe began slapping instead of squishing. Her arms ached from clutching the plastic bag. Her fingers grew numb. But inside her blazer pocket, folded small and warm against her body heat, 5 purple words kept her moving. You can do it, Mama. This chance had to be different. By the second mile, her body sent messages she couldn't afford to hear. Cold had moved past her skin into muscle. Shoulders ached from the weight of the bag. The soaked blazer hung heavy like a wet blanket. The fabric clung and pulled with every step. She hadn't eaten breakfast. The last eggs and granola bar had gone into Alara's lunch and backpack. That was the morning equation. Feed the child first. Whatever remained was hers. Most mornings, nothing remained. Her stomach cramped, a dull ache that tightened with each block. She breathed through it the way she breathed through everything. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Keep walking. The rain turned aggressive. Drops hit the pavement so hard they bounced back up, creating a mist that rose like steam. Sienna's shoes were no longer shoes. They were sponges strapped to her feet, heavy and squelching, each step feeling like peeling tape. Then, a silver SUV sped through the right lane, hit a massive puddle, and a wall of dirty, gritty water erupted from the curb. It struck her from the waist down, soaking her slacks, splashing her blazer, dripping from the bag she clutched like a shield. She stopped. For a few seconds she stood perfectly still, eyes closed, fists tight, rain hammering her face. Every nerve screamed the same word. Stop. Stop walking. Stop trying. Stop pretending this will end differently. Then she opened her eyes, checked the bag, and saw the Ziploc still sealed, documents still dry. She was soaked, freezing, exhausted, hungry, humiliated by a stranger's carelessness. But the only thing that mattered remained protected. That was the math. That had always been the math. She could break. The papers could not. Sienna retied the bag, shifted it back against her chest, and started walking again. If I stop, nothing changes. If I keep walking, maybe everything does. She repeated it like a metronome, one sentence per step, until the words became rhythm. The rhythm became motion, and the motion became the only thing keeping her upright. She crossed a wide boulevard at the 3rd mile. The intersection was exposed, no buildings to block the wind. For half a minute, rain hit her sideways, driving into her ear, blurring her vision. She held the bag tighter and leaned into it like a sailor in a gale. Blocks behind, the car crept forward through traffic. Quentin Ashford had not moved from the back seat. His coffee had gone cold. His phone had buzzed many times. He hadn't touched either. He was watching a woman drown on dry land, and he couldn't look away. She's still walking, he said, quieter than he intended, as if speaking too loudly might reach her through the rain and glass and the distance he had chosen to keep. Elias glanced in the mirror. Years of driving Quentin, and he knew when to speak and when to stay silent. This morning he chose to speak. "Sir, she's completely soaked. It's cold out. Should we offer her a ride?" "No." The word landed hard. Elias's hands tightened on the wheel. "She doesn't know who we are," Quentin continued, eyes fixed on the figure ahead. "She doesn't know she's being watched. That's the point. I need to see what she does when no one's looking, when there's no audience, when there's no reward. Words are free. That's why they're worthless." The sentence played in his head like a recording he had built his philosophy on. Resumes lie, interviews are performances, references are scripted. The only truth is unobserved, unrehearsed, uncompensated behavior. And right now, he was watching the purest form of it he had ever seen. A woman walking through a storm because she had no other option, refusing to stop because she had something worth walking for. But Elias's question had planted something uncomfortable beneath Quentin's ribs. He was testing her, the way he tested every final candidate. Yet none had ever walked miles in the rain. None had ever been this desperate, and none had ever made him feel the test itself might be the cruelest thing in the room. "She could get sick," Elias said, staring ahead. "Pneumonia, hypothermia. She's not dressed for this." "I'm aware," Quentin said. "Then why are we still following her?" Quentin didn't answer because the honest answer was one he wasn't ready to say aloud. He was following her because she fascinated him, because her refusal to stop contradicted everything he had come to expect from people, because in years of hiring and observing, he had never seen someone choose suffering over surrender with this quiet, unperformative resolve. But there was another reason, darker and less noble. He was following her because it cost him nothing. He was warm. She was not. He was dry. She was not. He was watching her pain from heated leather, and some buried part of him knew his inaction was its own kind of test, not of her, but of him. And he was failing. Elias kept driving. Quentin kept watching. And blocks ahead, Sienna kept walking, unaware that the man who would decide her future was measuring her from behind tinted glass while doing nothing to ease the weight she carried. Around the 4th mile, her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Fingers numb, pulling the phone out meant shifting the bag and risking the documents, but the caller ID said Beatrice. Sienna stopped under the narrow overhang of a closed barber shop, just enough aluminum awning to turn the downpour into a drizzle. She pressed her back against the locked door and answered. "Hey, Miss Beatrice, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. Alara's up. She's eating breakfast. She wanted to talk to you before school." Rustling. Then a small, bright voice, untouched by the cold and darkness that governed the rest of Sienna's life. "Mama?" Sienna closed her eyes. "Hey, baby girl? Mama, is it raining?" Sienna looked at the street, water pouring from gutters, a trash can tipped in the wind, sky so dark it looked like evening. Rain roared, swallowing every other sound. "Just a little," she said, voice steady. She wouldn't let it shake. "Don't forget your umbrella," Alara said. Sienna swallowed hard. "I won't, baby, I won't forget." "Are you going to get the job, Mama?" "I'm going to try my very best." "I wrote you a note. Did you bring it?" Sienna's free hand moved to her blazer pocket. Through wet fabric, she felt the small, folded square, still there, still dry against her body heat. "I brought it," she whispered. "I always bring it." "Good, because you can do it, Mama. I wrote it so you'd remember." "I remember, baby. Every single day." "Okay. I love you more than the whole sky." Sienna opened her mouth. No sound came for 2 full seconds. Then, softly, like a prayer, she said, "I love you more than the whole sky and all the stars in it." The call ended. Sienna stood under the awning another moment, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Rain or tears, it didn't matter. The result was the same. Wet skin, burning eyes, and a reason to keep walking that no storm could wash away. She tucked the phone away, shifted the bag to both arms, stepped back into the rain, and walked faster than before. Scientists have a word for what Sienna Vale carried that morning. Not in the plastic bag, not in the blazer pocket where a child's note stayed folded and dry, but something deeper that rain couldn't soak, rejection couldn't break, or dozens of unanswered applications erase. They call it grit. Years ago, a psychologist named Angela Duckworth began studying why some people succeed where others equally talented give up. Her research across military academies, spelling bees, boardrooms, and classrooms revealed something surprising. The strongest predictor of long-term success was not intelligence, talent, education, or connections. It was the ability to maintain effort and interest over years despite failure, adversity, and the complete absence of visible progress. She called it grit. Grit appeared most often in people told no. So many times the word lost its power. People who woke facing a wall and chose to push against it anyway, not because they believed the wall would move, but because standing still was worse. In America, a significant share of single mothers live below the poverty line, nearly 1 in 3. The average job seeker sends many applications before receiving an offer. For women with resume gaps, mothers without reliable childcare, candidates from lower income zip codes that algorithms quietly filter, that number climbs much higher. Sienna's many applications over the months were not exaggeration, they were reality. Grit is not loud. It doesn't give speeches or post quotes. Grit is a woman waking before dawn without an alarm. It is cold water because someone else needs the hot. It is checking a banking app showing almost nothing, then putting on shoes and walking east into a rainstorm because east is where the interview is and walking is the only verb left. Sienna didn't know the studies. She had never heard of Angela Duckworth. She had no language for the thing inside her that refused to stop. She only knew her daughter needed her to keep walking. And so she did. By the 5th mile, her legs had stopped hurting. Not because pain was gone, but because her body had moved past it into something else. A numbness that wasn't physical. A stillness in her chest like resignation's quieter, braver cousin. Acceptance. Not of defeat, but of the cost. This is what it costs, she thought. This is what it costs to try again. And I'll pay it because I've been paying it for months and I haven't gone bankrupt yet. The rain had thinned slightly, still falling, still cold, but the violent sheets had softened into a steady curtain. Sienna could see farther. Buildings ahead were taller, sidewalks wider. She was entering the business district. With every block the world grew cleaner, newer, more expensive. A silver car pulled up at a red light. The window rolled down. A woman in her 40s, curly hair under a rain hat, leaned across. "Sweetheart, you're soaking wet. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" Sienna looked at the warm car, dry seats, heat blowing hard enough to ripple the woman's scarf. It would take a couple of minutes. The building was less than a mile away. She could be there in the time it took to buckle a seatbelt. The word rose in her throat like a reflex. Yes, please, God, yes. But something older and quieter stopped her. She had asked for help so many times, from Rylan who left, from the landlord who evicted her, from the unemployment office where she waited hours only to be told her paperwork was incomplete, from interviewers who smiled and chose someone else, from a system that saw her as a statistic. She had walked miles through a rainstorm alone, hungry, freezing, and she was still standing, still moving, still holding dry documents against a wet chest. If she got in that car, she would arrive dry and comfortable, but she would arrive owing someone for the last mile. She was tired of owing, tired of depending, tired of arriving only because someone else carried her. "I appreciate it, ma'am," Sienna said, voice hoarse, teeth chattering, "but I need to do this myself." The woman stared a long moment, not with pity, but recognition, as if she had seen that look before, maybe in her own mirror. "You're something else. You know that." "I'm just a mom," Sienna replied, "trying to get to work." The woman smiled, nodded, rolled up her window, and drove away. Sienna stood at the intersection a few more seconds. The light turned green. She stepped off the curb and kept walking. Blocks back behind tinted glass, Quentin Ashford sat perfectly still, jaw tight, hands flat on his knees. He had watched the entire exchange. Elias glanced in the mirror. In years of driving Quentin through mergers, lawsuits, funerals, and celebrations, he had seen anger, calculation, control, satisfaction, boredom. He had never seen confusion. But that was exactly what he saw now. Confusion. And beneath it something that looked like the first crack in a wall that had stood for a very long time. Quentin said nothing. Elias said nothing. The car rolled forward, and the distance between the billionaire and the mother in the rain stayed exactly the same. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Quentin had said it 1,000 times. But watching a woman refuse a stranger's kindness because she needed to finish what she started on her own 2 feet, the sentence played differently. Like a record he had listened to for years that suddenly skipped and landed on a note he had never heard. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Fine. Then, what was walking worth? What was the price of miles in cold rain with no umbrella, no breakfast, and almost nothing in the bank? What did it cost to hold a plastic bag against your chest for over an hour because the documents inside mattered more than the body carrying them? What was the going rate for turning down a warm car from a kind stranger because you would rather arrive soaking wet on your own terms than drive on someone else's? If words were free, then what Sienna Vale was doing right now was the most expensive statement Quentin Ashford had ever witnessed. And she was paying for it with her body, with her comfort, with every calorie she didn't eat so her daughter could have eggs instead. A memory surfaced, uninvited. Years buried and suddenly clear. Evelyn Ashford, his mother, before she married Richard, before the suburbs and 2-car garage and the stability that let Quentin go to community college and build an empire. Before all that, Evelyn had been alone. Young, 1 son, no degree, working night shifts at a packaging plant miles from their apartment. One night the car broke down. Transmission dead. Couldn't be fixed until Friday, and it was Tuesday, and Evelyn didn't get paid unless she showed up. So she walked. Quentin was a child. He didn't remember all of it, but he remembered the shoes, his mother's white sneakers by the front door in the morning, soaking wet, soles peeling, lined with newspaper to absorb water. Beside them, her work boots already dry and ready for the next shift. She never told him she walked. He figured it out years later. No bus ran that late. No cab served that part of town. Richard wasn't in the picture yet. She simply walked miles alone at night because showing up was the only option, and Evelyn Ashford was not a woman who confused difficulty with impossibility. Quentin hadn't thought about those shoes in years. He was thinking about them now. Outside, Sienna was approaching the business district less than a mile to go. Her pace hadn't slowed. If anything, she walked faster, back straight, arms locked around the plastic bag, looking like a woman marching into battle with nothing but the decision to show up. Quentin's throat tightened. He swallowed once, then again. Elias, when she gets to the building, call Claire at the front desk. Tell her to have a cup of coffee ready, hot, black, and hand it to the woman who walks in wet. Don't tell her it's from me. Don't tell her anything. Just give her the coffee. Elias looked in the mirror. For the first time that morning, something in Quentin's face had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted, like a wall that had stood for decades had developed its first hairline crack, thin as a thread but running deep. "Yes, sir," Elias said. That was all. No grand gesture, just a cup of coffee ordered quietly from the back of a luxury car for a woman who would never know where it came from. But it was the first thing Quentin Ashford had given anyone in years, without calculating what he would get back, and it terrified him. The Ashford Logistics building rose stories of glass and steel against the gray sky. Sienna saw it from blocks away. She had looked it up the night before, memorizing the address and studying the exterior so she wouldn't hesitate at the entrance or look lost. She belonged. She didn't belong. She knew that. But she was here, and being here was enough for now. Miles walked, over an hour and a half. Her phone's step counter showed many steps, but she didn't check. She didn't need a number to confirm what her body already knew. Every muscle ached. Feet swollen inside waterlogged shoes. Blazer a cold, damp weight. Fingers stiff and tinged blue. But she was on time, minutes early. She pushed through the revolving door into the lobby and warmth hit her like a wall, climate-controlled air wrapping around her soaked body with a gentleness that almost buckled her knees. Marble floors, tall ceilings, a massive photo of a silver-haired man in a dark suit behind the reception desk. She didn't look long. She had somewhere to be first. The restroom was on the ground floor. She walked quickly, leaving wet footprints, hoping no one noticed. The door closed behind her. For the first time in nearly 2 hours, she was alone in a room with walls, a ceiling, a mirror. She set the plastic bag on the counter, opened it, pulled out the Ziploc, ran her fingers across the sealed edge. Dry. Everything inside, perfectly dry. She exhaled a long, shaking breath that carried the weight of miles. Then she went to work. She pulled off the running shoes, stuffed them into the bag, slipped on the black heels she had carried the entire way. They were dry. They fit. She stood taller, and something in her posture changed immediately, as if the shoes remembered a version of her she was still trying to reclaim. She took off the blazer, held it over the sink, and wrung it with both hands. Water poured out in a steady stream. She wrung it again and again until it was damp instead of dripping, put it back on, pulled the lapels straight, smoothed the shoulders. Her hair was plastered to her head. She finger-combed it back into the tightest low bun she could manage without an elastic, found a bobby pin in her pocket, and secured it. Not elegant, but neat, controlled. She looked in the mirror. A woman stared back, eyes bloodshot from cold wind, skin pale from exhaustion and low blood sugar, blazer darker at the shoulders where water still clung, but posture straight, chin level, gaze steady. Not perfect, but ready. She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out the folded square of lined paper, purple crayon. 5 words. She read them slowly, like a prayer she had memorized, but needed to hear again. "You can do it, Mama." She folded it back along the same creases and placed it in the breast pocket over her heart. Then, she picked up the Ziploc, straightened her shoulders, and walked out. Floors above, Quentin Ashford stood at the window of his corner office overlooking the main entrance. He had entered through the parking garage, taken the private elevator, spoken to no one. His suit was still perfect. His coffee had been refreshed. His morning looked like every other morning in the fortress he had built. But something was different. He watched the front door. At the right time it revolved and a woman stepped through, wet blazer, black heels, straight back, head level despite the tremor in her shoulders that even distance couldn't hide. She was shaking, but she was walking forward, and she didn't look down once. Quentin pressed his palm flat against the glass. It was cold. He held it there a moment, then turned, picked up his phone, and called Vivian Ellis. "I'll be sitting in on the final interviews today." A pause. "Sir, this is for the coordinator position. You don't usually attend these." "Today I do." The waiting room on the 4th floor was designed to make people feel small. High ceilings, clean carpet, leather chairs that whispered money, a glass table with fanned business magazines, a water dispenser with cucumber slices floating in it. Cucumber in a waiting room for a modest salary job. Sienna sat in the second chair from the door, deliberately. Not the first, too eager. Not the last, too passive. Second, present, visible, but not desperate. 3 other candidates sat there. A man in his late 30s in a crisp charcoal suit. A woman in a burgundy blazer with a leather portfolio and confidence that filled the room like perfume. And Wyatt, mid-20s, blue suit, expensive watch, hair slicked back with something that smelled of sandalwood and certainty. They were all dry, perfectly groomed. Not a hair displaced, not a wrinkle visible. They had arrived by car or rideshare, lives that included the option of getting from one place to another without drowning along the way. Sienna was still damp. Her blazer had dried enough to pass at a distance, but up close the fabric at her shoulders was noticeably darker. Her shoes were dry, her documents were dry, but her hair was still slightly wet at the nape, and a single drop of water rolled down the back of her neck every few minutes, cold and persistent, like a reminder of every mile walked. Wyatt noticed first. He leaned toward the woman in burgundy, angling away from Sienna, but keeping his voice loud enough to carry. "Did she swim here?" A snort, a covered mouth, eyes that flickered to Sienna, then away. Sienna heard it. She felt the words land the way the rain had, cold, targeted, designed to soak in. She did not react, not a flinch, not a glare, not a tightening of her jaw. She simply opened the ziplock on her lap, removed her resume, and reviewed it page by page, line by line, as if she were the only person in the room. The resume was pristine, crisp white paper, clean ink, not a wrinkle, smudge, or drop of water. She had carried it against her chest for miles through a rainstorm, wrapped in plastic, shielded by her own body, and it had arrived in better condition than Wyatt's arrogance. She exhaled quietly, the tiniest release of tension. Then Clara, the receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and reading glasses on a beaded chain, approached holding a paper cup with a lid, steam curling from the opening. "Excuse me," she said, stopping in front of Sienna. "Someone asked me to give this to you." Sienna looked at the cup, then at Clara. "I'm sorry, who—" "I don't know, hun. I was just told to bring you a coffee, black." Sienna reached out and took it. Her cold fingers, still slightly blue at the tips, wrapped around the cup like it was the first warm thing she had touched in hours, because it was. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking on the second word, not from sadness, but from the shock of unexpected kindness in a room where someone had just laughed at her for being wet. Clara smiled, nodded, and walked away. Sienna held the coffee with both hands, letting the heat seep through the paper into her palms, up her wrists, into the part of her chest where miles of cold had settled like stone. She didn't drink it right away. She just held it, the way you hold something you didn't earn and don't understand but desperately need. Wyatt watched from across the room. No one brought him coffee. No one brought anyone else coffee. Just the woman with the wet blazer, the dry resume, and the quiet refusal to be broken by people who had never walked miles for anything. Sienna took her first sip soon after. The interview door opened shortly after. Her name was called first. The room was smaller than she expected, a rectangular table, 3 chairs on one side, one on the other. A glass of water already poured, notepad and pen placed neatly beside it. On the far side sat Vivian Ellis, blonde hair pinned back, glasses, warm smile that felt practiced but not fake. And Reed Harrington, VP of Operations, tall and lean with gray at the temples, the kind of man who read every resume with a red pen and believed doubt was the most useful hiring tool. Between them, a third chair, empty. Sienna noticed it immediately, angled slightly, as if someone had been sitting there recently or was expected. She didn't ask. She sat, placed her resume on the table, folded her hands in her lap, and pressed her cold fingers together to stop the trembling. "Ms. Vale," Vivian began, glancing at the file, "thank you for coming in. We appreciate you making the time, especially given the weather today." "Thank you for having me," Sienna said, voice steady. She had rehearsed this opening many times in the mirror at Beatrice's apartment and many more times in her head during the walk. "I'm happy to be here." Standard questions followed. "Tell us about your experience. Walk us through your previous role. What software are you familiar with? How do you handle competing priorities?" Sienna answered carefully. She knew logistics. She had coordinated routes for trucks at her previous company. She understood scheduling software, inventory management, vendor timelines. Her answers were solid, not spectacular, but solid. The answers of someone who had done the work but lacked the polish of a candidate who had spent years climbing ladders. Reed Harrington wrote notes the entire time, short clipped strokes, never smiling. Then he looked up. "Miss Vale, your resume shows a significant gap in employment. That's notable. And the role requires someone who can manage high-pressure logistics across multiple regional offices simultaneously." He paused, letting silence do its work. "What makes you think you can handle that kind of pressure?" Sienna's hands tightened in her lap. She felt the familiar pulse of panic, the voice that said, "You don't belong here. You're a fraud. You walked miles to sit in a room with people who will see right through you. For a few seconds of silence, then she spoke. Mr. Harrington, for the last many months, I've been managing a household of 2 on a monthly income of 0. I coordinated emergency shelter placement for my daughter across several facilities, food banks, and medical assistance programs, all simultaneously, all with different eligibility windows, different documentation requirements, different deadlines. I tracked every application on a spreadsheet on my phone. Many job applications, each customized to the listing, several interviews, each prepared for as if it were the only chance I'd ever get. She paused, because the next sentence was the truest thing she had ever said in a room full of strangers. I've been managing supply chains my whole life, Mr. Harrington. I just didn't have a title for it. The room went quiet. Vivian's pen stopped moving. Her eyes were wide, not with pity, with recognition. The kind of look that said, I've underestimated you and I know it. Reed stared at Sienna a long moment, red pen still, jaw tight. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But he didn't argue either. And for Reed Harrington, silence was the closest thing to concession. Sienna exhaled. Her hands loosened. The panic receded, not gone, just quieter, pushed down by something stronger. She was still wet, still cold, still the woman who had walked miles to sit in a chair she wasn't sure she had earned. But she had answered the question, and the answer had come from a place no certification could teach and no resume could capture. Then the door opened. Sienna heard the soft click of the handle, the whisper of air shifting. Footsteps on carpet, measured, unhurried, the kind of walk that owned every room it entered. She turned her head. A man stepped through, tall, silver-haired, dark suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. He carried nothing in his hands, no folder, no phone, no coffee cup, just presence. The kind that makes a room rearrange itself without being asked. Vivian straightened. Mr. Ashford, we weren't expecting you. I know, he said. Nothing else. He walked to the empty chair, sat, unbuttoned his jacket with one practiced motion, and placed his hands flat on the table. Sienna felt her stomach drop. She recognized him, not from the walk, not from the car she never saw, but from the massive photograph in the lobby. Silver hair, dark suit, the same face. Only now he was close, looking directly at her with eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. Quentin Ashford, CEO. The name at the top of the building, the letterhead, everything. And he was sitting in the empty chair watching her. Vivian and Reed exchanged a glance. This was irregular. Quentin Ashford did not attend coordinator interviews, not officially, not visibly. Whatever was happening, it wasn't on the schedule. Quentin studied Sienna for a few seconds, blazer still damp at the shoulders, hair still slightly wet at the edges, hands folded on the table, steady but not quite still, a faint tremor. Cold or nerves? Probably both. But her back was straight. Her eyes were forward. She did not look away. She did not apologize for her appearance. She did not shrink. Miss Vale, he said, voice calm and controlled, the voice of a man who chose every word the way a surgeon chose every cut. I have one question. Sienna swallowed. Yes, sir. Why didn't you reschedule when you saw the weather this morning? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Vivian's breath caught. Reed's pen froze. Sienna looked at Quentin Ashford, the man who had everything, who had never in his adult life been forced to choose between walking miles in the rain or losing the only chance he had been given in months. She didn't rehearse. She didn't calculate. She simply told the truth. Because I've been waiting many months for someone to give me a chance. I've sent many applications. I've been told no several times. This morning the bus was canceled and I couldn't afford a ride, but I could walk. So I walked. She paused, voice steady. I wasn't going to let rain take this away from me. The room was silent. Not polite professional silence, but real silence. The kind that fills a space when something true has been spoken and no one knows what to say next. Vivian's eyes were shining. Reed's pen lay untouched on the table. And Quentin Ashford, the man who had built his empire on the belief that words were worthless and only actions mattered, sat perfectly still. Because he wasn't looking at Sienna Vale anymore, he was looking at Evelyn Ashford. Young, white sneakers by the front door, soaking wet, lined with newspaper, ready for the next shift. His jaw tightened, just once, just enough, a crack so small that only someone who had watched him for years would have noticed. 2 floors below in the lobby, Elias sat waiting. He couldn't see or hear the interview, but somehow he felt something shift, like a wall high above him had developed a fracture that would never fully close. Here is something most people don't talk about. The systems we build to find talent are remarkably good at filtering out the people who need opportunity the most. Studies show that interviewers form judgments within the first few seconds of meeting a candidate, not based on answers or skill, but on appearance, the firmness of a handshake, the brand of a bag, the condition of shoes. Researchers call it affinity bias, the unconscious tendency to favor people who look, dress, and carry themselves the way we do. It goes deeper than clothing. Resumes with addresses from lower-income zip codes receive significantly fewer callbacks than identical resumes from affluent neighborhoods. The same qualifications, the same experience, the same words on the same page. But the zip code whispers something the hiring manager hears without knowing they're listening. And what it whispers is risk. For single mothers, the bias doubles. A gap on a resume, even one caused by raising a child alone while navigating eviction, medical debt, and the collapse of every safety net, reads as instability, unreliability, flight risk. The language of hiring is clinical. The damage is personal. And then there's the question no one asks out loud, but everyone is thinking, can she really commit? She has a kid, no partner. What happens when the child gets sick? When school calls? When the math of single parenthood collides with the demands of long work weeks? Sienna had the skills. She had the experience. She had walked miles through a rainstorm and arrived early with documents so dry they could have been printed that morning. But every system she had encountered for months was designed to see her wet blazer before her resume, the gap before the grit, the zip code before the person. Quentin Ashford's interview room was no different, except the man in the empty chair had watched her walk. And for the first time in his career, he was asking himself whether the system he trusted was measuring the right things. But Sienna didn't know any of that. She only knew the interview was over. And now she had to wait. In the conference room on the top floor, with its long walnut table and view of downtown Charlotte that made the city look orderly from a height where poverty was invisible, Vivian Ellis sat at one end with Sienna's file open. Reed Harrington sat across from her, arms folded, red pen resting on his notepad like a weapon he hadn't decided to use. Quentin stood by the window, back to both, hands in his pockets. She's underqualified, Reed said first. No degree, no certifications, significant time out of the workforce. Her last role was at a company no one's heard of managing a fleet much smaller than ours. On paper, she's the weakest candidate we've seen today. Vivian tapped her pen. Her answers were strong. The supply chain response was genuinely impressive. She understands logistics at an instinctive level. Instinct doesn't run a regional routing operation, Reed countered. I need someone who can work the software, manage vendor timelines, handle pressure from regional managers who don't care about anyone's personal story. I need competence, documented, verified, measurable. You need someone who shows up, Quentin said quietly, still facing the window. Reed paused. Sir? Quentin turned. You want measurable? Fine. She walked miles in a rainstorm to get here. She arrived early. Her documents were in perfect condition. Her shoes were changed. Her blazer was wrung out by hand and put back on. She sat in a waiting room where another candidate mocked her, and she didn't flinch. She opened her resume and reviewed it like she was the only person in the room. He walked to the table and placed both hands flat on the surface. I'm not hiring her because I feel sorry for her. I'm hiring her because she walked miles in the rain and showed up on time with dry documents. That's not desperation, Reed. That's operational excellence. Reed's jaw tightened. And if she can't handle the systems, if the gap means she's rusty, if the personal situation affects her reliability, then she's gone, Quentin said. No hesitation. Probationary period. Standard terms. Same expectations as every other hire. No special treatment. No lowered bar. If she can't do the job, she goes. Same as everyone else. Vivian looked between them. So, we're offering her the position. We're offering her the same chance we offer anyone, Quentin corrected. She just has to prove she deserves to keep it the same way everyone does. He paused. The only difference is, I already know what she's willing to walk through to get here. Most candidates I have to guess. Reed uncrossed his arms slowly. He didn't agree yet, but he didn't argue either. In that room with that man, silence was permission. Vivian made the call that afternoon. Sienna answered on the second ring. She said nothing for a few seconds after hearing the offer. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of many applications and unanswered prayers, she said, "When do I start?" And Sienna Vale started at Ashford Logistics soon after. She arrived early. No one asked her to. The first weeks were disorientation dressed as orientation. New badge, new desk, new software system she had never seen. A proprietary routing platform required days of training just to navigate the dashboard. The learning curve was steep. The pace was relentless. Routes needed coordination across regional hubs. Vendor calls started early. Reports were due by end of day. She made small mistakes. A misfiled shipment code, a forgotten callback, a report in the old template. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to notice. Enough for whispers to start. The rumor traveled through the company the way rumors always travel. Fast, distorted, impossible to trace. The CEO hired her personally. Some said charity. Some said worse. Nobody knew the details. Everybody had a theory. Sienna felt the stares in the break room, the elevator, team meetings where her contributions received polite nods but no follow-up. She was the outsider, the anomaly. The woman who arrived with wet hair on her first day and didn't explain why. She didn't explain anything. She just worked. After a few weeks, something shifted. It started with a routing anomaly she noticed while cross-referencing delivery schedules with pickup windows in the corridor. Several trucks were being dispatched to overlapping zones within the same block, creating redundant mileage no one had flagged because the system treated each route independently. Sienna pulled the data, ran the numbers by hand because she didn't trust her new skills yet, double-checked on her phone during lunch. The overlap was costing the company thousands a month in unnecessary fuel, driver hours, and fleet wear, every month for at least the past couple of years. She brought the finding to her team lead Russell, who had been at Ashford for years and had never once been surprised by anything. He was surprised. "How did you catch this?" he asked. "I looked at it the way someone looks at a budget when they only have a little," Sienna said. "You notice every penny that doesn't need to be spent." Russell took it to Reed. Reed took it to operations. The fix was implemented within weeks. Thousands a month recaptured, a significant amount a year found by a woman who had been on the job only weeks. After a couple of months, Sienna was the first person in the office every morning, early, before lights were fully on, before the coffee machine finished its first cycle. She used the quiet hour to review the previous day's routing reports, flag discrepancies, and prepare morning briefs. By the time her team arrived, she had already built the scaffolding for the day. She was also often the last to leave. Not every night, not when Alara had school events or Beatrice needed her home early, but most nights she stayed until the work was done. Beatrice picked Alara up from school on those evenings, fed her dinner, helped with homework, read bedtime stories about butterflies and elephants and brave little girls who weren't afraid of storms. Sienna called every night at a set time, without fail. Even when the call was only a couple of minutes, even when all she said was, "I love you more than the whole sky." The review day arrived. Sienna sat in Reed Harrington's office in the afternoon. The room was small and functional, charts, metrics, a window overlooking the parking lot. Reed opened a folder containing her evaluation, several pages, typed, thorough. He had reviewed every metric personally: attendance, accuracy, initiative, peer feedback, supervisor assessment. He read through the results without emotion. Satisfactory, above average, exceeds expectations. The checkboxes were clinical. The conclusion was not. At the bottom of the last page, in his own handwriting, Reed had written one sentence. Recommend for full employment, no reservations. He signed it, dated it, closed the folder. Congratulations, Miss Vale, he said, voice flat and professional, but he made eye contact, and for Reed Harrington that meant something. Sienna nodded. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. She walked out, closed the door, and stood in the hallway a few seconds. Then she pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with one hand, and cried. Silently, briefly, the kind of crying that happens when something you have been holding together for a very long time finally gets permission to let go. That evening, Quentin Ashford received an email from Reed Harrington. No subject, no attachment, just 2 words in the body. You were right. Quentin read it once, closed his laptop, and, for the first time in as long as he could remember, left the office before sunset. The trouble started weeks after Sienna's probation ended. It started the way most trouble does in corporate environments, not with confrontation or public accusation, but with a conversation not meant to be overheard. Dominic Shaw, senior regional manager who had been with the company for years, managed the southeastern corridor. He had numbers that consistently met targets, a corner office, and a reputation for being thorough in ways that made some respect him and others avoid him. Dominic believed in process, documentation, measurable, verifiable data. He did not believe in exceptions, stories, or hiring decisions made by a CEO who hadn't sat in on a coordinator interview in years and then suddenly appeared for one. It bothered him quietly at first, then less quietly. During a routine background audit of new hires, a detail surfaced that Dominic had not expected. Sienna Vale had been evicted from her previous address over a year prior. Her credit score was low. She had an outstanding medical bill in collections and an unpaid utility balance, a history that, reduced to numbers on a screen, painted a picture of financial instability difficult to reconcile with someone handling daily logistics worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He brought it up in a management meeting, not with malice, with precision. I'm not questioning her work performance, Dominic said, leaning forward. I'm questioning the risk profile. We've given operations access to someone with a documented history of financial instability. How can we trust someone with our logistics operations when she can't manage her own finances? The room was quiet. Not because the question was unfair. It had logic behind it, the kind that looks reasonable on paper and devastating in practice, the kind that confuses circumstances with character and poverty with incompetence. Vivian Ellis pushed back gently. Her performance metrics are above average, Dominic. Reed signed off on her evaluation personally. Reed signed off on probation, Dominic replied. I'm talking about the next period and the one after that. Patterns don't lie. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. In a company of thousands, a senior manager's doubt travels faster than any memo. Within weeks, Sienna noticed the change. Not in the work itself, which remained routes, schedules, vendor calls, reports, but in the air around the work. A silence in the break room when she walked in. A pause in conversation at the coffee machine. Eyes that lingered a second too long on her badge, her desk, her face. She didn't know Dominic's name. She didn't know about the meeting. She didn't know her credit score had been discussed in a glass-walled room by a man who had never been evicted from anything. But she knew something had shifted, the way you know it will rain before the first drop falls. The air changes, the pressure drops, and you start bracing for something you can't see yet. One night she sat on the floor of Beatrice's living room, helping Alara glue cotton balls onto a paper cloud for a school project. The apartment was warm, the lamp low. Clover the rabbit propped against a pillow supervising. Sienna's phone buzzed, an internal newsletter, nothing urgent. But the act of looking pulled her back into the building, the hallways, the silence that had started following her like a shadow. She thought about quitting. The word appeared fully formed, as if it had been waiting. Quit, leave, find something else. Somewhere no one knows your credit score. Somewhere you don't have to prove you deserve to exist in a building you helped make more efficient. Mama! Alara's voice pulled her back. Her daughter looked up with bright eyes that held no knowledge of credit scores or background checks or the weight of being judged for the worst chapter of your life. Do you like your new job? Sienna looked at her daughter, at the cotton balls, at the paper cloud, at the purple crayon tucked behind Alara's ear, because she always kept one close in case she needed to write something important. I love it, baby, Sienna said, and her voice didn't waver. I love it so much. She put down the phone, picked up the glue, and pressed a cotton ball firmly onto the paper cloud, holding it there until it stuck. She wasn't going anywhere. Floors above, in his corner office with a view of the city, Quentin Ashford sat reading Dominic Shaw's email. He read it once, read it again, then closed his laptop without replying. He turned to the window. The city was lit below, thousands of lives visible only as moving headlights and glowing windows. Somewhere out there, a woman who had walked miles in the rain was deciding whether to stay at a job where someone had decided her past mattered more than her present. Quentin said nothing, did nothing, not yet. But his jaw was tight, and his hands resting flat on the desk were not relaxed. Meridian Foods was a significant account, and Ashford Logistics was about to lose it. The problem had been building for months. Delayed shipments, missed delivery windows, complaints from warehouse managers across states who kept receiving freight many hours late, always during winter months. Dominic Shaw managed the account. He had thrown every resource at it, rerouted trucks, added drivers, extended shifts. Nothing worked. The delays kept happening, predictable as snowfall, and every missed window cost credibility the company couldn't afford to lose. The procurement director had sent formal notice, fix the delays within a month or the contract would move to a competitor. A month, millions at stake. Dominic had weeks left and was out of ideas. Sienna found the problem on a late night. Alara was asleep, Clover tucked under her chin. Beatrice's apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the soft clicking of an old laptop that ran hot after an hour. Sienna had been reviewing corridor routing data for a separate task when she noticed the same pattern she had flagged weeks earlier. The software calculated optimal paths based on distance, traffic, and fuel efficiency, but it didn't account for seasonal weather. Not meaningfully, not dynamically. It used static annual averages, which meant that in winter, when ice fog and road closures altered conditions daily, trucks were being sent down routes that looked efficient on screen, but were functionally impassable on the ground. The fix wasn't complicated. It required integrating a real-time weather overlay into the routing algorithm, something that could be done with an existing API the company already licensed for another department but had never connected to logistics. Sienna wrote the proposal in a couple of hours. Clear, concise, several pages. Problem identification, data evidence, proposed solution, implementation timeline, projected cost savings. She formatted it the way she had at her previous company, clean and professional, because she didn't know how Ashford liked documents and figured the safest option was to make it impossible to dismiss on presentation alone. She didn't send it to Quentin. She didn't have his email. And even if she did, the idea of a coordinator emailing the CEO directly felt like stepping onto a stage she hadn't been invited to. So she sent it to Vivian Ellis with a single line. I noticed something in the routing data. I think this might help. Please let me know if I'm overstepping. Vivian read it the next morning, read it again, then forwarded it to Quentin with her own line. You need to see this. Quentin read it on his phone during his morning drive. By the time Elias pulled into the parking garage, he had read it 3 times. The solution was elegant. The data was sound. And the problem it addressed was one his senior operations team had failed to identify for months. He called Sienna into his office mid-morning. She walked in looking the way people look when summoned by the person whose name is on the building. Nervous, controlled, hands clasped like a student called to the principal's office. You wrote this? Quentin asked, holding up his tablet. Yes, sir. The procurement team is coming in soon for what they've described as a final meeting. I want you to present this to them. Sienna's face went still. Sir, I'm just a coordinator. I don't present to clients. I've never even been in a client meeting. You were just a coordinator, Quentin said, voice quiet but certain. Now you're the person who solved a multi-million-dollar problem my senior team missed for months. You found it. You explain it. The day arrived. The team sat on one side of the conference table, three executives in dark suits with the particular stillness of people who had already made up their minds. Dominic Shaw sat at the far end, silent, folder closed, nothing new to offer. Sienna stood at the front wearing the same navy blazer, pressed, clean, the same blazer she had walked miles in. Beside her, a screen displayed her proposal. Her hands shook for the first half-minute. Then she started talking, not performing, not selling, just explaining the way someone explains a problem they have lived inside, the way someone who has spent her whole life finding the cheapest route, the fastest path, the most efficient way to stretch nothing into something, explains the logic of optimization to people who have only ever known abundance. She spoke for around 15 minutes. When she finished, the room was silent. The procurement director leaned back, looked at his colleagues, then at Sienna. When can you implement this? Dominic Shaw didn't say a word. Not during the meeting, not after. He packed his folder, straightened his tie, and walked out without looking at anyone. Sienna stood by the window a moment after everyone left. The city stretched below. Rain was falling, light this time, almost gentle. She pressed her hand against the glass the way someone else had pressed his hand against glass once, floors up, watching a woman walk through a storm. She didn't know about that moment. She just stood there, feeling the cold through the window, and thought about how strange it was that the same rain that had once tried to stop her was now just weather. Just water. Just another day. Years later, Sienna Vale sat in an office on a floor of Ashford Logistics. Her name was on the door. Operations Manager, Southeast Division. 2 promotions in 2 years, each earned with quiet, relentless competence that made people forget she had ever been the woman with the wet blazer. But she never forgot. Her office was modest by company standards. A desk, a bookshelf, a window facing an east. On the bookshelf, between a logistics manual and a framed photo of Alara on her first day of 3rd grade, sat a small object visitors sometimes noticed but never asked about. Clover the rabbit, retired from active duty, ears still limp, placed there by Alara herself, who declared Mama's office needed someone to keep her company. Alara was older now. She had her own bedroom in an apartment Sienna rented with her own paycheck. 2 bedrooms, clean kitchen, working radiator, windows that let in light without letting in wind. It wasn't luxury, laminate counters, builder-grade carpet, but it was theirs. The door locked from the inside. The lease was in Sienna's name and nobody could take it away. Alara had health insurance and dental. She had her ears checked several times in the past year, every visit covered. She was reading above her level. She joined the school art club. Her latest project was a watercolor of a butterfly pinned to the refrigerator with a star-shaped magnet. Sienna bought a used car, an older Toyota Camry with a scratch on the rear bumper she never bothered to fix because it didn't affect the engine, and vanity was still a luxury. She ranked below groceries. She drove it to work every morning, under half an hour door to door, no matter the weather. She never walked miles again, but the walk never left her. Quentin Ashford had changed too, though he would never describe it that way. He would say he had adapted, recalibrated, adjusted his methodology based on new data. That was how his brain worked. But the people around him, Vivian, Elias, even Reed Harrington, saw something different, something wider. Months after Sienna's first promotion, Quentin announced a new internal initiative. He stood before the entire Charlotte office, hundreds of employees in the main atrium, and introduced a program he had been quietly developing for months, the 6 Miles Initiative, a comprehensive hiring and support program for single parents from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. It included subsidized transportation for the first several months, partnered childcare with local providers, a mentorship track pairing new hires with senior staff, resume workshops, interview coaching, and, most importantly, a hiring pipeline that evaluated candidates on demonstrated resilience and transferable skills rather than traditional credentials alone. No one in the room knew where the name came from. Quentin didn't explain. He stood at the podium, read the details, took questions, and sat down. Professional, measured, controlled. But Sienna knew. She sat in the audience, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward, and she knew exactly why it was called 6 Miles. And when Quentin's gaze swept the room and landed on her for a moment, she nodded. Just once, just enough. That was all they needed. Two people who understood the origin of something without needing to name it. A shared memory sealed between a rainstorm, a conference room, and a cup of coffee that arrived without explanation. In the small office designated for the program on a lower floor, a glass frame hung on the wall near the entrance. Inside, pressed flat and slightly yellowed, was a plastic grocery bag folded neatly and tied at the top, the kind you find in any kitchen drawer, in any apartment, in any city. Visitors glanced at it sometimes. Most assumed it was modern art, a statement piece. Nobody asked what it meant, but if you knew the story, if you knew what that bag had carried through miles of rain held against a soaking wet chest to protect documents that remained perfectly dry, you would understand it was the most meaningful thing in the entire building. Not in dollars, but in what it cost the woman who carried it. In its first year, the 6 Miles initiative placed many single parents in full-time positions across Ashford Logistics and partner companies. Most were still employed after a year. Many had received at least one promotion. Several had moved into stable housing for the first time in over a year. Numbers on a page, but behind every number was a morning, a decision, a pair of shoes, a walk someone chose to take when every reasonable voice said stop. Quentin Ashford had spent his life believing words were free and therefore worthless. But the 6 Miles initiative wasn't built on words. It was built on a walk, on a plastic bag, on a woman who showed up soaking wet with dry documents and said, "I wasn't going to let rain take this away from me." And that, Quentin had learned, was worth more than anything he had ever built. Years after she walked miles through a rainstorm, Sienna Vale was driving to work one morning when the sky opened up. Not the slow, steady kind, but the sudden, furious, personal kind that turned windshield wipers useless and streetlights into smeared ghosts behind sheets of water. She was on the same road, the same stretch she had walked years earlier, in shoes that filled with water and a blazer that weighed more wet than dry. The car's heater hummed. The seats were warm. The radio played something soft Alara had chosen before school drop-off, still set to the same station because Sienna never changed it. She liked driving in her daughter's world. Then she saw her on the sidewalk heading east, a young woman, dark hair plastered to her face, a blazer that didn't fit right in the shoulders, and in her hands, pressed against her chest, a plastic bag knotted at the top wrapped around something flat. Documents. Sienna's foot moved to the brake before her brain formed a thought. The car slowed and stopped. She pulled to the curb, reached across, and opened the passenger door. The woman looked at her, startled, suspicious, soaked. "Get in," Sienna said. "I've been where you are." The woman hesitated, looked at the open door, the warm car, the dry seats, the woman behind the wheel whose eyes held something she couldn't name but somehow recognized. She got in. Sienna pulled back onto the road. The wipers beat their rhythm. The heater wrapped around both of them. For a few blocks, neither spoke. Then the woman said quietly, "I have an interview downtown. I couldn't afford the bus." Sienna nodded. "I know." She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't need to. Some things are understood between people who have carried documents through rain, who have chosen walking over waiting, who have learned that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is measured not in miles, but in the willingness to keep moving when every voice says, "Stop." Sienna drove her to the building, watched her step out into the rain, straighten her blazer, and walk through the front door with her back straight and her bag held tight. Then, Sienna sat in the car a moment, engine running, wipers clearing the glass. She thought about Quentin Ashford, about a black luxury car blocks behind her on a morning just like this, about a man who watched from his car and didn't stop, who followed instead of helped, who observed instead of offered. She understood now why he had done it. The test, the distance, the need to see what someone does when no one is watching. But she also understood what he had missed, what it took him years in a walk through a rainstorm to learn. You don't have to test people to see their worth. You just have to stop the car. The distance between where you are and where you belong is not measured in miles. It's measured in the number of people willing to stop and say, "Get in, I see you." Quentin had watched from his car. Sienna had walked through the rain. But in the end, it was Sienna who taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. That the test you design for someone else is always, in the end, a test for yourself. And she had passed. Not by walking miles, not by arriving on time, not by keeping her documents dry while her body shook with cold. She passed by, stopping the car. By doing the one thing Quentin couldn't do that morning, by looking at a stranger in the rain and choosing, without hesitation, without calculation, without a single thought about what it might cost or what she might gain, to simply help. That was the lesson. That was the whole story. Not wealth, not power, not the distance between a luxury car and a pair of wet shoes. Just a woman who remembered what it felt like to walk alone and refused to let anyone else do it. Thank you for listening. If this story reminded you of someone who never gave up, share it with them. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you on the next one.